Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I am very pleased to rise to talk about this bill that is now before the House. And I thought, since I have spent more of my life as a teacher than as a politician in a university, I thought I would focus a little bit on the implications for the university and college sector. And I think in this regard, there is both good news and bad news. The bill gives the educators something positive, and then in another way takes that back. And what I am referring to is, let me just check my notes, the new fair dealing rights and exceptions, where education is now included, and this will make it somewhat easier for teachers in the classroom to use certain materials without arduous cost. And I know that some of the producers have objected to this, but it's my impression that it's a positive thing. Some teachers want to innovate. An example would be a teacher wanting to show a 1-minute clip of a movie to make a point, and currently they cannot do that without paying very high copyright fees. But the impact of this new education right on producers will be, I think, less negative than some have claimed. This is because in determining what is considered fair, our courts use a two-step test created by the Supreme Court of Canada to determine whether a use is fair or not. The first step is to determine whether the use of a work is for one of the fair dealing purposes listed in the Act, and the second step is to assess the fairness of the use against 6 factors, including the amount of the work used and the effect of the use on the market for the work. And using this test, our courts have consistently determined that the scenarios envisioned by creators, unmitigated free copying with no payments, is not fair and thus not permitted. So one way, Mr. Speaker, to obtain greater clarity is that a clear definition of what is fair should be included in the Act, and one way to accomplish this would be to embed the Supreme Court's two-step test into the Act itself. So that, I think, overall is positive and fair and reasonable and balanced. The problem comes with the issue of the digital locks. As we've said, Bill C-11 introduces new rights for Canadians to make copies of copyrighted works for personal use, such as format shifting, time shifting, and making backup copies. But Bill C-11's new digital lock provisions override these new rights. In other words, under this new law, if a company puts a digital lock on a CD, the person who buys the CD cannot circumvent the lock to put the music onto their iPod without breaking the law. This exact issue was highly controversial change which was fought when the Conservatives' previous copyright bill was introduced. Mr. Speaker, a long list of leading academics, educators, librarians, archivists, documentary filmmakers, and citizens have expressed legitimate concern that digital lock provisions will undermine the balance that copyright law is intended to strike between creators and users, completely undermining a user's ability to use copyrighted works that they have purchased. Several experts, including Canadian Research Chair Professor Michael Geist, have suggested an easy way to fix this would be to amend the bill to make it okay to circumvent a digital lock if the purposes for which a lock was circumvented were lawful. I think this would be an easy amendment to the bill, Mr. Speaker, and it would preserve that better balance which I think most of us are seeking. Because restrictive digital locks can effectively undermine consumer rights articulated in the copyright and the very balanced copyright law seeks, and because the Conservatives have made no attempt to change their stance on digital locks, that is sufficient reason for the Liberals to oppose this bill. And going back to my example of education, Mr. Speaker, the bill makes it easier for educators to use materials in their classrooms, but then it negates that advantage by bringing in these digital locks, which under certain circumstances would make it illegal for the professor to produce the clip or the other material which he or she wish to use in their class. So it would be lawful to use that material in the class, but because of the digital locks, it would be unlawful to produce the material which it is legal to use. So that makes no sense, Mr. Speaker, and that is why we in this party are extremely concerned about this issue of digital locks.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires?
Questions and comments?
Mr. Muscadab Valley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank my colleague across the way for his comments. I, too, as an educator, had great concerns about the copyright legislation. But when looking into this and talking to people in the educational community, they are very satisfied with the bill the way it is now. In fact, we know that the Association of Universities and Colleges support this bill. They have actually said, and I quote, "This bill reflects a fair balance between the interest of creators and the user of copyright works, and it is a positive step forward to the university community across Canada." They also say that the bill clarifies important questions and will help ensure students and learners have access to the content they need, including digital material. And as my colleague across the way mentioned, one of the things it does for public school teachers, it now says that you can use any media to show these type of products. So before, it specifically indicated overhead projectors and flip charts. You could use those. But now it takes specific references away from specific technologies so you can use modern technology in the classroom. So the universities and colleges are very happy with this legislation. They say it is a fair treatment, protecting both creators and users. Also, it improves the technological availability to our classroom teachers across Canada, and I would hope that the member across the way, as a former teacher, would support that.
Hear, hear. From Markham, Unionville.
Speaker, the most charitable response is to say that my colleagues quoting from the Canadian Association of University Teachers is incomplete. They are not fully happy with this bill, and I happen to have with me a direct quote from James Turk, Executive Director of the Canadian Association of University Teachers. Here's what he says. "We are pleased that the bill reflects the priorities of Canada's academic and research community to expand fair dealing specifically for educational purposes. This represents a genuine effort to introduce balance into Canadian copyright law." And that's the part that my honourable colleague likes. Then he goes on to say, and this is also a quote, "At the same time, we are disappointed that the legislation makes it illegal to circumvent digital locks even for lawful purposes, lawful reasons such as fair dealing," Turk adds. That was precisely my point, Mr. Speaker, and it is precisely stated by the Executive Director of the Canadian Association of University Teachers.
Excellent.
Questions et commentaires? L'honorable député de...
The honourable member for Beauport-Limoilou. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listened very attentively to my colleague's speech, and I am also quite concerned about the digital lock clause. Here's something very ironical. In the spring, our colleagues opposite were getting all dramatic about Statistics Canada and the possibility of prison for people who didn't want to fill out the long form. Now, under this bill, the people who try to circumvent the digital lock would have to pay fines of $1 million and prison sentences of up to 50 years. Now, considering the omnibus bill, that could make it even more difficult for someone who is accused, who is charged, make it more difficult for them to avoid this. What does my colleague think? Yes, I agree with my colleague's point. I don't think it's a good idea to imprison people for that kind of thing. But perhaps it is not surprising, given the Conservatives' attitude, who want to imprison practically the entire